As Bob pointed out, we are switching gears a little bit over the course of 3 Sundays. We're going to be engaging texts that call us to examine stewardship as a theological concept, as something the church ought to be concerned with. And this will culminate in our Commitment Sunday on November 25th. So during this week, you will receive a mailing from the church, which is our letter from the stewardship chair, Charlie Heberlin. And included in that will be a card where you can make your pledge, if you so desire, to the church's budgeting year in 2019. And so today, we're in the book of 2 Kings. He read chapter 5, 1 through 15. The tomb of the unknown soldier is in Arlington Cemetery. It contains the unidentified remains of a soldier from World War I who is the recipient of the Medal of Honor, the Victoria Cross, and several other honors from other countries. There are many of these unknown soldiers in war. They each receive a Medal of Honor, and their funerals are presided over by the President. We take seriously their sacrifice, and we even have soldiers guard the tomb of the unknowns. Witnessing the changing of the guard is an awesome and solemn experience, if you've ever had the opportunity to be there. I am reminded that there are many unnamed and unknown people in our world who contribute so much to the fabric of our society. You might recall some from our biblical literature. There was a widow who came to the temple with her mite for the offering. And there was a Samaritan man who was just walking down the road one day, and he stopped to help this other man who had been beaten and left by the roadside to suffer and perhaps even die. And there was the soldier who stood at the foot of the cross and concluded, surely this was the Son of Man. All of these examples go to show that we need not always know someone's name in order to learn from their lives or to benefit from what they have done from other people. It is at this point that we enter the ancient story, and this one, like so many others, is full of contrasts. It is a story about powerful nations and weak nations. It is about rich, powerful people and the slaves that serve them. It is about listening to the unknowns in our midst to be able to receive a blessing that we might not even deserve. If this story sounded a little confusing to you upon the first reading, please be sure that you are not alone. I had to read the story several times, and then I still went back to certain verses to make sure that I actually understood what was going on. And so if you would allow me, what we'll do is walk through some of the contours of the story together, and we'll smooth out some of the rough spots. If you would find it helpful, and you might, you can turn to page 336 in the Old Testament of your Pew Bible. And we begin in chapter 5, verse 1. So we're introduced to Naaman, commander of the army of the king of Aram. And it might interest you to know that Aram is modern-day Syria. And it says that he's a great man. He's a commander of the army. He has power. And although this man is a mighty warrior, he suffers. And what is his disease? It is leprosy. Leprosy is a big term that is used to describe many different skin diseases in our biblical literature. Anything from eczema, psoriasis, acne, scarring, any of those kinds of things might have just been lumped together under leprosy, and they believed it to be highly contagious. And so these people were often put outside the city gates and were to be outcast until they could be purified and made pure of their disease. So that Arameans are the strong ones in this story. They have raided Israel. And we see that when they raided them, they took slaves back with them to Aram. And so we have this one slave girl who is captive in Aram, but she is from the land of Israel, and she has no name, but she serves Naaman's wife. And she tells the mistress, if you would tell Naaman to go to Samaria, we have a prophet in Israel, a man of God, as he is called, and he can cure him of this disease. This is where it gets confusing, I think, in verse 4. So Naaman went and told his lord about what the girl had said, and the king allows Naaman to go to Israel, and he's going to give him all kinds of things, including a letter to take with him. But do they go to the prophet where they're supposed to go? Where do they go?
To the king.
To the king of Israel. So that is a little bit of a rough spot in the story, because we're not sure why they're going to the king instead of the man of God. Maybe to get permission to go to the man of God, Elisha, we don't know. But for some reason, they go to the king, and they take with them 10 talents of silver, 6,000 shekels of gold, and 10 sets of garments. That, even by today's standard, would be a lavish gift to give somebody. And so when they bring this to the king gets upset because the king believes that the king of Aram thinks that he is the one that is supposed to cure the leprosy. And he does not have that ability, and he knows that he doesn't, and so he gets upset, and he thinks that this other king is trying to start a quarrel that will lead to another raid, another battle with Israel. And that's why he tears his garments in grief. And so he says, I am not the man of God, but Elisha understands what is going on and says, why have you torn your clothes? Simply send the man to me. And so Naaman came with the horses and chariots and came to Elisha's house. And there goes the rest of the story. So there are some of the few rough spots ironed out for us a little bit. And we know that he is healed of the leprosy by Elisha. And so there are some things that we notice the second time around in the story that helps us make more sense of them. And one of them is that Aram, or modern-day Syria, has power over Israel. But have you noticed? They still need them, don't they? That's a good lesson for all of us. No matter what positions of importance or power we might hold, no matter how successful we might be, we should never forget that we need to exist in relationship with other people. It is best not to burn bridges. You might need to cross them again one day. And one quote is, be nice to people on the way up. You might need them on the way down. And so here it is, this interesting situation that this mighty nation still needs to go to the lesser nation. And they know not to go empty-handed. They show up ready to pay for their services. The king of Israel receives them first, and we believe that's probably just a mistake of the messenger. The message started with a slave girl, it went to her mistress, and then it went to Naaman, and then it went to the king, and somewhere they got their lines of communication crossed. The items that were taken into Israel were not meant for the king. The king doesn't need them. The items were intended for the prophet. It was common in those days that the prophets received gifts for their services. You had to pay them in order to do what you're asking them. And so when the king receives the letter and sees the gift, he thinks that that other king is expecting him to do the healing, and he knows that if he doesn't do it, that they're going to be raided. And so he says, Elisha hears about this. He says, send the man to me. I am the one he seeks. But the next thing that happens is really quite offensive. It begins in verse 9. When Naaman shows up at Elisha's house, Elisha does not go out to greet him. Could you imagine that? Perhaps Elisha is afraid of contracting the disease. Or maybe I would like to think that Elisha is placing attention on God's activity in this healing, but we really don't know. It sounds offensive to us, doesn't it? And it was offensive to Naaman. So not only does this powerful man have a horrible skin condition, but when he travels a great distance to be healed, he is slighted by the prophet, or so he thinks. He does not receive even basic hospitality, nor does he receive immediate healing. There is more yet that he needs to do to satisfy the requirements of healing. And what is that? He is instructed to go to the Jordan River and not just wash himself once, but wash himself 7 times. He is so angry at this, he tells the slaves that come with him that he could have just bathed in those rivers back home. Why did he come all the way to Samaria to be told that? He has come perhaps a week's journey just to be told, not by Elisha, but by one of Elisha's servants, that he still has some more traveling to do. He has to go all the way to the Jordan River. And he doesn't want to do it. He's ready to just pack up his tent and go back home. But once again, the unnamed people in the story are wiser than the commanding officer. They say to him, "Were it more difficult, would you have done it? If Elisha had given you a more difficult task, would you have done it?" They let him know that after all of this effort, this is really just a small, simple instruction. And they encourage him to go on to the river where he can find his healing. This is a troubling story in several accounts. First of all, we want Elisha to heal this poor man, at least show him some hospitality at his home. Even though Naaman is a powerful commander and comes from a powerful nation, he's still human. In fact, he's just as human as the rest of us. He is not granted any kind of particular health based on his status. That's not the way the world works. But why would we put this extra burden upon him? But on the other hand, when he's told those instructions, he's not particularly grateful, is he? He showed up with these gifts for the prophet, but at this time he doesn't really believe in this God of Israel, and he might not even believe in the prophets. Perhaps, like so many, he is just desperate for healing. Haven't you noticed that people will do some pretty interesting things when conventional medicine have failed them? They will undergo all kinds of procedures and buy all kinds of herbal remedies and go to all kinds of quote-unquote healers. So maybe he's just going along with what people are instructing him to do. He might not even believe that any of this is going to provide the necessary healing. But one thing I like about this story is that they show up ready to play. There is not just a mild gesture, like when you show up at a friend's house with a bottle of wine for the hostess. They have an absolute bounty for the prophet. Loads of silver, shekels of gold, 10 changes of clothing. For a prophet in those days, this was beyond generous. It was beyond anything Elisha would have ever asked for his services. It is downright lavish. How interesting that this lesson we get in lavish generosity comes from an outsider to the faith in this story. Notice also that there is no faith requirement for healing. They don't have to recite a creed or say a prayer or go sit down front with the counselors for salvation. They're not required to come to our temple or church and we'll give you what you need. I was at an event recently at another church, and perhaps it comes with the job, and I get really nosy when I'm in other churches. I like to see what's going on and how things are done there. And I noticed at this reception that there was a flyer on the bulletin board. So I I make my way over there and I start reading the flyer. And it was instructions on how to receive assistance from this particular parish. The instructions were as follows. There was a particular Sunday that they gave out assistance to the needy. And you had to come to worship on this Sunday, and you had to get your bulletin. And then after the service, you could show that bulletin to the outreach committee and make your plea for assistance. In other words, what this church was communicating was, we're not going to help you unless and until you jump through a few hoops. We do not require anything of the people who come to our church. I encourage them to come if they would like a church home, and I'm always happy to offer prayer for them. But we are not the people who dangle help like a carrot at the end of a stick. Like Elisha and God, we extend it unconditionally. And we hope that showing that kind of love and compassion will let them know what a life of faith is all about. And that's what I love about the agencies that we donate to. You show up, you might need to demonstrate your type of assistance, but you will receive it unconditionally. And so we're back to the unknowns of the story. There is an unknown slave girl who served Naaman's wife. She is the one who gets the ball rolling to begin with. She is the first one to speak up and say, get to the man in Samaria so he can be healed. There are other nameless unknowns in the story. Elisha sent out his unnamed servant, and Naaman had personal slaves traveling with him. These ones encourage him along the pathway. They encourage him to follow Elisha's instructions, even though he's already ready to go back home to Aram, even with his condition unchanged. Notice, it is the unknowns, it is the outcasts, it is the slaves. In this story, they are the wise one. Isn't it true that in God's kingdom, our expectations are often turned upside down? The poor become the most blessed. The powerful are made low. The strong are made most vulnerable. The slaves are the wise, and the leaders are the foolish ones. Sometimes we stop just shy of what God wants for us. Sure, mostly we do the right things. You have come to church, you're opening up your hymnals. I see some of you singing. In a little bit, we're going to have communion and pass the plates around, and we're all going to participate. We come all this distance, and yet, sometimes we're willing to turn around and go home unchanged. There are some good church-going people who might do this their entire lives. Come to church, listen politely, pass the plates, stand for the benediction. It's like a wash, rinse, repeat kind of faith. What if we had just a little bit more asked of us? What if we listened to the voices of wisdom, even though they might be nameless and unknown? And what if we went that final distance and we went and dipped ourselves in the river of Jordan, not just once, but 7 times, to be completely healed? What if we went the final distance that was asked of us? Would we become a leader at the church in the next year? Would we pursue our faith in meaningful ways outside the walls of this sanctuary? Would we be willing to show up with what might be considered for us a lavish gift? And would we believe that by offering that, it would be life-changing? When it comes to our stewardship campaign, we're really not asking you to give until it hurts. We're asking you to examine, to allocate, and to give a percentage of what you have received. We're asking you, like Naaman at the end, to be grateful for what has been given to you and to recognize that it is the God of Israel, the God who gave us Jesus Christ, who is the giver of all good things, especially those things that transform our lives. I want you to show up expecting that great things are going to happen, that you might show up with your gift and be healed and transformed and renewed for the living of life. Two things are for certain. You won't be transformed because of the human activity in this place. For everything we do here, we point directly to God. And the second thing is if you go the final distance of what is asked of you, you will not go home the same as when you got here.